Washington, D.C. This is after the Nicostine Indians in Anacostia, after whom Anacostia is named, the Nicostine Indians. After they killed them and wiped them out, then first they made the capital of Washington in Anacostia. Then they decided, no, we're gonna move it to where the capital is now. Black folk have always been in Washington, D.C., of course, as slaves, but we've been here. In 1840, even the freed slaves in Washington, D.C., the only job they could have was pushing a cart or riding a carriage. Couldn't have any other kind of job. So then we go to 1860. In 1860, they gave every white person in America 160 acres of land free. Then they turned around 2 years later, in 1862, Land Redemption Act gave every white person 125 acres for 160 acres for $1.25 an acre. You probably know about Oklahoma, the Oklahoma football basketball team, you call them the Sooners. Why so? Because when they started going out west, they had a line that they drew, and they said, when we give the signal on a given date, all the white man got to do is run across the line, take a stick, this is what you call staking a claim, and stick it in the ground wherever you wanted to, and all that land was his. So that's why you call the Oklahoma Sooners the Sooners, because some of them waited till night came and sneaked across the line and stuck their stake in the ground, so they were the Sooners. They went across before everybody else. Okay, 1862, the great Abraham Lincoln, who loved you so much. Abraham Lincoln called a meeting in Washington, D.C. at the White House that black men and out of 200 black men that built the White House and the Capitol, 90 of them were black slaves who were hired to build the White House, taking stones from the quarry of Virginia. And when they built the Capitol, they first were going to put up on top of the Capitol, they got an Italian to create a top for the Capitol. He first did a statue of a slave with the chains broke, a freed slave. They said, oh no, we ain't putting that on top of the Capitol because we got these niggas as slaves and we ain't letting them go. So he said, okay, I'll do something else. So what he did was the helmet of a Roman soldier. That's what that crown on the Capitol is. Well, they got it here. They couldn't get it on top of the Capitol. So they knew this slave from South Carolina named Philip Reed, who had all this expertise. They brought him to Washington, said, Philip, show us how to get this thing out of this crate. Philip showed him how to get it out. Then they can't get it up on top of the Capitol. Philip, show us how to get it up on top of the Capitol. This black slave, Philip Reed, showed them how to erect it and get it up on top of the Capitol. So on top of that Capitol, you're talking about a Capitol built by your ancestors. You're talking about a White House built by your ancestors with a Roman helmet on the top of the Capitol that was put up there by one of your ancestors' slaves from South Carolina. So we go to 1862. Lincoln calls a meeting, come on, D.C. now. Lincoln calls a meeting of some black preachers, bring them to the White House. He says, if it wasn't for your race, this is in the middle of the Civil War, we wouldn't be fighting each other. Not, we wouldn't be fighting each other because we made y'all slaves, but we wouldn't be fighting each other because y'all are here. So I got some money from Congress. I'm going to send all of y'all to what we now know as Panama, which was called Chiriquí at that time. Barren without anything. They would have starved to death in 3 weeks. But he said, I'm going to send all of y'all there. Thanks to those great bright black preachers, they said, we ain't going nowhere. We built that house up, White House you living in. We built the Capitol. We built this city. We ain't going nowhere. So boom, 1865, Lincoln frees the rest of the slaves. Of course, they got freed in D.C. in 1862. But they said, no black man in D.C. can get a job. It was good enough for him to be free. So he can't get no job wherever, for money. Wherever he works for free because we gave him his freedom. What more does he want? All right? So then in 18 65, when General Andrew Sherman went through the South, William Sherman, I'm sorry, when he went through the South as the head of the Union Army, he destroyed everything. He burned down the plantations, he destroyed everything. The vice president was Andrew Johnson. You ain't gonna hear none of this in the history books that you read. Andrew Johnson was a cracker from Memphis, Tennessee. Andrew Johnson didn't like the fact that when Sherman defeated all these people and destroyed their plantations, so they started cutting black women's throats and throw them in the river, said now swim on to Yankee land. They started burning and destroying black men and lynching them and doing every kind of thing. So when Sherman wins his final battle in Savannah, Georgia, talking about D.C. now, Sherman has, this is where you get 40 acres on a mule from. Sherman says they had a rule, a law, that when you go through a town and you defeat it, all the slaves in that town are free. So everywhere Sherman's going, he's picking up slaves. So now when he gets to Savannah, Georgia, he's got his 4,000 army troops and he's got 4,000 slaves following him. So he writes to Lincoln, say, Lincoln, what are we gonna do? I got all these slaves, I can't feed them and my soldiers too. What are we gonna do? He said, well, talk to them. So again, they meet with 21 black preachers. One of them from North Carolina, from my home, Oxford, North Carolina, Reverend Frazier. They said, Sherman said, what y'all want? They said, we want land, because white people don't like us, and we don't believe they ever will. So this is when we got reparations. So they gave us 330 miles of land from South Carolina through Georgia down to Florida, right on the water, so they could have water to irrigate their crops. And General Sherman said, okay, you ain't got no mules, so I'm gonna loan you my army mules. That's where the 40 acres. Everybody got 40 acres, and they used the army mules. Later on, some liberal politicians tried to pass a law in Congress, 40 acres, a mule, and $50. It never passed. But at any rate, when Johnson becomes, he participates in the assassination of Lincoln. I ain't got time to go into that tonight, but he was a part of it. They closed off all the bridges out of town except the 11th Street Bridge. That was the only way to get out of here. And so Johnson left that bridge open so Booth could get away. Booth went out here to Upper Marlboro, Maryland. The man that they killed had red hair. Booth had black hair. Booth got away. Booth lived in California till 1913. But anyway, that's another story. But the point of the matter is, Booth participated in the assassination. So what did Johnson did? He became president after he helped to assassinate Lincoln. So then they took all them 330 miles of land from Florida to South Carolina to Georgia and gave it back to the white folks. Then, after 1865, let's go in D.C., let's go, no, let me back up a minute, to 1840s on the mall. When you go to the mall now, that's where they had what George Washington called a livery stable. That's where you keep animals. In other words, they had our ancestors in crates. And this is where the dozens came from. They had so little to criticize each other about, when they slammed down those doors on those crates, sometimes they chopped one of our ancestors' toes off or cut an ear off. So they didn't have nothing else to feel good about. They say, your mama ain't got but one ear. Wow. Your mama ain't got but 4 toes. And so that's where that came from. Then they take a young black man and take him away from his mother till he's 15, 16 years old, bring him back, and put him in a cabin and let him have sex with his mama. And when he finished, tell him, you a MFer. That was your mother you just had sex with. Bury black men up to their neck in the soil, pour molasses and syrup on their head, and then let a school of bees come and eat all the flesh. Give them 100 lashes, then train a cat, lay them beside the fire so the blisters will swell up, and then train a cat to come and claw the blisters open, and then pour salt and pepper into those cuts and wounds. And so all of this was done to our ancestors, in addition to separating them, putting some in the big house with the white folks to help take care of the babies and cook the food, and some out in the field. Malcolm X talks about this in terms of the field niggas and the house niggas, and the jealousy that the brothers was talking about just now. They thinking they better because they in the house and the others out in the field. So then we go on to D.C. In the 1920s. Let's skip to the 1920s. This is when, so you can see what's happening right now. In 1920s, there were a lot of black folks who lived in Washington and Georgetown. They raised property taxes so they couldn't stay there. You got to understand the repetition of the cycles that you're going to see in just a moment. They raised the taxes. They lost their homes, so they couldn't stay there. Let me back up for a minute. Let's back up to 1865, after they took the land back right here in D.C. Oliver Howard, who founded Howard University, along with black people in Barry Farms. When he founded Howard University, he saw black people living in the alleys. They had no clothes, they had no heat, they had no water, they had no anything. They were living in the mud. Oliver Howard said, I hate to see these people. He was a fairly good white man, white preacher. And he said, I can't have these black people living like this. So as the head of the Freedoms Bureau, he loaned money to blacks to build Barry Farms. This was one of the greatest communities in the history of black America. Frederick Douglass' son lived there. Solomon G. Brown, who long before Mr. Bunch, who's the head of Smithsonian, he was the head of the Smithsonian from 1852 to 1905. 54 years as the head. Why I say head, he was in charge because the white man was in charge, was out of town a lot, so he basically ran it. He was also on the government of D.C. D.C. had a city council, 1871 to 1874. 1874, so they could get some federal money, they asked the Congress to make it a federal territory. That's why D.C. is a federal territory today, so that the federal government chose who's going to run D.C. Until you had your first elected government 104 years later when, what's his name, with the first mayor of D.C., Walter Washington, became mayor. And then, of course, after him, Marion Barry, But so here we go. Georgetown. They ran black folk out of Georgetown. Where did they go from Georgetown? They went to Southwest. So what did they do in Southwest? In the 1950s, they called it urban renewal, but it really was urban removal. Yeah. White folks pushed all the black folk out of Southwest into Southeast and changed the code, the zones, so that they could put 30,000 apartments in Southeast to house all these poor black folk that they had removed from Southwest. So now here we are in 2019. What did they do? You got to see the same picture. Mm-hmm. They raised the property taxes in 2005. And what did they raise them to? For a single family dwelling in Southeast, all over the city actually, it went to $5 from $1 $100 per $100 of assessed value to $5 per $100 of assessed value. Commercial property, Good Hope Road, MLK, went from $5 per $100 of assessed value to $10 per $100 of assessed value. All the property on the corner of Good Hope and MLK belonged to me. They took it just like they took Barry Farms. How did they take Barry Farms? They built Suitland Parkway, built it right through Barry Farms, and by eminent domain, took all the houses of all these wonderful people that lived in Barry Farms and put public housing in there and destroyed that black community. So what did they do? My tax on that property of Good Hope and MLK, I was paying $2,000 something a year tax. Tax went From in 2005 on, it went from $2,700 to $27,000 a year.
Wow.
So how could I keep it? I did it for 2 years, and then they came and just took it. Eminent domain, so that that building that you see going up there on that corner that will be going up, that's somebody else's wealth. That should have been my wealth for my family. So that what I'm getting at is this. When they passed the Federal Housing Act in 1934, from 1920 to 1960, no 1% of black people in America could get a loan to buy a house. 40 years. So that, and in the HUD passed a law to all lending institutions, do not sell a house in a community or give a loan to black people. And how did they do that? You heard of redlining. That was actually the case. They took the map of Anacostia, they took the map of every other part of the city, they took the map of every city in America where black folks live, and they put red paint on it. So that when the lending officer, so where you live, what's your address? 3664 Highwood Drive, Southeast Washington, D.C. That's my address. They said, look at the map. Oh, that's in the red area. I'm sorry, you can't get no loan. Then on top of that, when they did give loans, the blacks who could afford to buy a property, who qualified for a prime loan, they gave them a subprime loan with high interest rates. So that when Marion Barrett comes along, Marion Barrett made a whole lot of black folks middle class. They live in PG County now.
Yeah.
Because they ran up out of here too. They moved to PG County, and so PG County became the richest black county in the United States, because all of these people who were nouveau middle class and beyond, high up government officials in D.C., head of housing, head of public works, head of everything. Now everybody is head of everything, don't look like you no more. So what I'm getting at is, ever since you've been in this country, by government policies, the most important speech made by Martin Luther King Jr. is the one that you probably never heard. That's the one that should be on that statue. 1967, August 1967, 7 months before they killed him. Title of his speech was An Analysis of Social Disorientation in America and a Solution to the Problem of Racism, Discrimination, and White Supremacy. When he gave that, he quoted Victor Hugo, the French abolitionist of the 1880s. Victor Hugo said, "Where there is darkness, sins will be committed. And the guilty ones are not those who commit the crimes, but those who create the darkness." He went on to say, white America has created the darkness with its policies. It has, through policies and laws, ensured that black people could never thrive, but only survive. So that when you see, brother, your mother in that line, it's not because she wanted to be in that line. It's not because any of those people want to be in that line. But a few of us have been fortunate enough to escape and have a little something, a little bit of bread to eat. But most of our people didn't make it, couldn't make it, under all the wicked laws that were passed. Like brother was saying, how can a mother who's trying to educate her children by herself educate them when, if she gets a job, they're gonna cut that little check off? So she needs the check and the job. But she can't get it because the government has a law that says you can. She can't have a family because Dr. Height was telling me she did social work before. If you don't know Dr. Height, she's one of these pictures on this wall. You can't see all these great black men back there. They back there. There's a whole lot of great men back behind that wall back there. But you see all this wall is dedicated to women. But Dr. Height was one of them. And she went to a house in New York as a social worker. woman hid her man under the bed. And she said he was so tall, she could see his feet sticking out under the bed. But instead of reporting that, she went back and said everything was fine because she knew what that would mean to her family.
Yes.
If they couldn't make it because that man was put out of the house, because he couldn't be in that house in a situation that deliberately miseducated and uneducated him, didn't even deal with education. Do you know in 1830, when education was first started, it was called common schools, instruction in regimentation. For poor white people, and they've been, you see, you gotta understand, poor white people are in the same predicament, but not quite as bad as you. That's why you should read a book called White Trash. That's a good assignment for everybody, and you get that book. White Trash is about poor white people who came to America. You know, they were the first slaves. The Irish, who came to America and worked as indentured slaves for 7 years. 2 minutes, I'm finished. They came here slaves. They told them y'all work for 7 to 11 years, we'll let you go free. And then they were in jail. They were living on the streets. They were dirty and filthy. They called them the offscourings of Europe. You know what that means? Human waste. They say they white niggas. They worse than black niggas. They brought them here. And they took them out of jail, took them off the streets to work for them. But they were lazy, they were filthy, they were nasty. They ate mud, they had all kind of diseases. And this is why Hillary Clinton lost the election. She called them what they've been called for 400 years. She called them a bunch of deplorables. When she said that, it was over. Because that's what they've been called for 400 years in this country. Bunch of deplorables. She said it. When she said that, you saw them white women on TV, them poor crackers. You know what they said? When Donald Trump was molesting women and grabbing people by their genitals, they had signs said, he can grab mine anytime. Wow. Because that's the way, the mentality of these people. And so they never even let them move into the city. That's why you have the trailer parks. Check out the trailer parks. Where are they? Outside of the city. They didn't want them inside the city with the white gentile because they're filthy, they're nasty, they're dirty, they're uncouth, they're backwards. And that's the way they viewed them. So that they migrated, one more minute. They migrated to the north. We talk about black migration, the crackers migrated to the north too. So when Martin went to Chicago, and then people started throwing stones at him. He said, these people worse than the people down south. It's because they were the people from down south. They came up north, and they wouldn't let them into the cities. So even now, when you go through the cities in the States, check out where the trailer parks are. They don't let them in the city. They never let them in the city. But now, just as they did in 1920 in Georgetown, in 1950 in Southwest, 1950 and 60, and built all these apartments over here for us to be over here. So that in the 1980s, I said to black folk over this side of the river, I said, since they got Chinatown and Germantown and Little Italy, let's make this little Africa. And it was the black folk in this neighborhood that almost ran me out of here. Wow. Because they didn't want it. But now they ain't got no kind of town. Because everything is pretty much, and that's why we're here. And I've been so encouraged by what I've heard tonight. We got some leaders in here. We're gonna get some more. We're gonna organize. We're gonna share information. You're gonna share information. We're gonna come up with some strategies. We're gonna have a short-term plan. We're gonna have a long-term plan. We gotta do something about right now. But we gotta do something about the future. We gotta learn the difference between capital and money. We got capital, but all we deal with is money. Money is what you spend. Capital is a seed. You take it and drop it in the ground so that it can grow and you can build something. That's what we want to talk about in the long term, how we build something.
Thank you.